before we even get started there, because you've mentioned it, and I definitely want to hear about your experience. You were you were at Teddy Long's wedding, right? The
Correct.
segment there in Atlanta,
Yes.
and wasn't Jagged Edge there and those guys, and
Oh yeah.
that's
Yes.
okay. Okay,
Oh yeah.
all right. So shout out to those guys. Greg, I want to know about that experience because you had some funny notes about that experience for sure.
So it was a SmackDown, and if you've ever been to a SmackDown or a Raw live anyway, it's a TV show, right? So you're
Hmm.
gonna be there.
Right.
It's not action the whole
Yep.
time. It's fun to be there, and this thing just felt like it took forever. And the coolest thing to me was seeing Doom come out because Ron Simmons and Butch Reed together with Teddy,
Right.
right? Because Teddy used to, being in that same building, well, in the same place. They used to go in the Omni, but if for anybody who
Right.
doesn't know, State Farm Arena back then it was called Phillips Arena. It's built on the same footprint, the same exact place that the Omni was. So having as a kid gone to see WCW and see Teddy Long come out with Doom in the masks, without the masks, that was a cool throwback to me that they were there. Um, but beyond that, dude, it was so long, and the fans totally turned, and that did not come across that way on TV. This is the time when
Right.
SmackDown was taped, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm-hmm.
and they edited out the fans. The fans were chanting, "We want wrestling. This
Oh
sucks."
no.
Um, it was
That breaks
the
my
"We want wrestling"
illusion.
thing was this isn't wrestling. I mean, all this. I mean, the fans totally turned on it, and at the point where Teddy fell out, people started booing, and so it was just a mess. I'm sure WWE in the background was just like, okay, edit all this stuff out. We got to
Yeah, we
block
gotta
out all
dress
these
this up.
fans.
Yeah.
It was just awful, man, and I swear it took up. I'm sure it didn't, but I felt like it took over an hour. I mean, it took
Mm.
forever, but because the whole setup and everything at
Mm-hmm.
the time, and man, it was awful. I'm not gonna lie. Now, when I watched it on TV, it did come off as awful as it did on in
Right.
in live. But man, it was just like we left like this was a waste of my time to the point that I was like, I'm not coming back to another SmackDown or Raw. I'm just not. It's just
Dang.
that wasn't worth my time. Yeah, it was bad, man. It was bad. I love Teddy, and to me, when we talk about talents across all of wrestling, that is one of the most underrated talents
Mm-hmm.
ever in the history of wrestling. We
Yes,
talk
sir.
about talking
Definitely.
him into the building. The dude could talk you into the building as a heel manager. Back in WCW, he was good. Whether he was with Johnny
Hmm.
B. Bad, whether he was with Doom, whoever he was with, he could talk you in. When he became a general manager, he was awesome. He reinvented himself. But if you remember, he was a referee first. If you
Hmm.
go back to that original trilogy, that I'll still argue the best trilogy of all time, Chi-Town Rumble '89, the referee that raised Ricky Steamboat's hand was Teddy Long.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. Okay.
So he's a referee, kind of becomes a bad referee, and then becomes a manager.
Right.
Transitions to WWE as a referee. I don't know if you guys remember that, but he came into WWE as a
That's right.
ref,
That's
and
right.
then ended up becoming, more of a manager and more of a talking head and all of that. So here's somebody who could ref, who actually ran his own promotion here in Atlanta for several years,
Hmm.
who um, could talk you into the building from a manager standpoint, could be a commentator at times. He could be um, the general manager, entertaining as hell. He booked Undertaker in more matches than anybody else in the history of wrestling. But the guy to me is so underrated. I mean, when you look at
Definitely.
Hall of Famers, you
Yep.
look at the people talk about Bobby the Brain and how talented he was, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but he could do everything. But so could Teddy,
Definitely.
and I would argue that Teddy was a better babyface. You think about it
Yeah.
as a general manager, Adrian, you and I have talked about before. The greatest of all time have to be able to be on both sides of that fence.
Definitely.
When you look at certain of the talents that we talk about being great, they weren't great on both sides of the fence.
Mm.
Teddy was.
Mm. That's a great point. That's a
But
great point,
in
man.
this wedding, acting was not Teddy's strong point. So that heart attack, everybody was like, "Oh, you gotta be
Yeah,
kidding me!" I mean, but you going to
it
try
was
to marry
cheesy. It was
Crystal? I
fun.
ain't. It was, but it was
Yeah,
a little bit too much suspending
So
disbelief.
I
You already
I
had to
yeah,
suspend disbelief that he was marrying Crystal, so
yeah.
there
this
was
is
that.
true. This is true.
As a TV viewer at the time, was in and out, right? I was watching here and there. I have
Hmm.
to say, very different, and maybe your experience is colored because you were there, and
Hmm.
I have a similar experience when another wedding that I was live for, another wrestling wedding. I love that segment so much. I love the whole. I don't know who decided to book Jagged Edge. I'm like, yo, what's going on? And then like the Godfather came back, and
Hmm.
like you look in the crowd. Like I was just showing this to my wife, and she was like, "Is that CM Punk?" It's like, "Oh, he looks so young. What's going on?" And like Kendrick is there, and they're like
Hmm.
it's an amazing TV segment from a
Oh
production
yeah.
point of view. So to hear
Definitely.
you say that they edited the boost, they did a pretty good job because I did not notice a thing. I thought the crowd was with it, even because you could see that the whole people that were on the opposite side of the camera probably had no view whatsoever.
Hmm.
Hmm. That's
Anyway,
true.
I'm
That's
I'm a
true.
big fan. I love Bruce. Everything about that segment was brilliant to me.
Thanks. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, and of course, look us up on socials at Suplex Dinner Club. And be sure to check out our other projects. We talk college football on Dogs versus All Y'all. That's a weekly college football podcast where we don't just talk about the Georgia Bulldogs, we talk about all things college football. The Life and Times Pod, which is short for the Life and Times of a Restaurant Lifer podcast, where I have some chill conversations with some cool and interesting people that I've met in my years in the hospitality industry. And of course, check out Talk 'em in the Building. That's a pro wrestling podcast where we solely focus on the promo. We talk about the talkers, we hype the hype man, and we pontificate on the promo. It's a fun project, and if you're a pro wrestling fan, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. If you're into TV and movie reviews, check out Four Corners Cinema with Ari and Adrian, a podcast where two lifelong pro wrestling fans review film and other forms of media that just so happen to have some of our favorite pro wrestlers. The Suplex Dinner Club family is growing, and I would love for you to be a part of it.